Hello everyone, welcome back. My name is Rosalie van Maas. I'm co-founder and CEO of Ellipsis Drive, and I'll be moderating today's session. Thanks for tuning in. We have an interesting conversation lined up for you today with our panelists, but before I'll have them say a few words in introduction, let me first set the stage. Today we're looking to understand how fields like property, casualty, and agri insurance can respond to the increased severity in natural catastrophes. Last year, 2022, has seen a high catastrophe loss rate, steeply increasing premiums, and a hard market. So it's of interest to better understand catastrophe-related risk across portfolios and strategies to cope with this. As we know, catastrophe models consist of four main components or steps: determining the stochastic events that we're considering, calculating the hazard of each of these events and determining their footprint, calculating the damage according to the vulnerability curves of a certain asset, and then ultimately quantifying the financial loss based on policy structures. Of course, for a catastrophe model to run, the primary input is exposure data, which is information about location and characteristics of the considered assets or people. At risk of stating the obvious, quality data or the quality of the model output is always anchored in the quality of the model input in terms of data. So having quality data as a catastrophe modeler is foundational to your ability to create an accurate representation of risk and lessening the assumptions that you might need to rely on. So as we dig into how we can better understand catastrophe risk, we will be talking about input data and we'll be talking about analytics. And to this end, we have two wonderful guests here today. So without further ado, Manfred, could I ask you to start with a quick intro on yourself and the company you represent?
Okay, my name is Manfred Krischke. I'm the founder and CEO of Cloudeo. I'm by education a space guy. So many years ago, I studied space engineering. I did everything nice stuff like communication, satellites, or whatsoever. But my first company was actually all about monitoring the Earth. That was the company RapidEye, a long time ago, which was a satellite constellation of 5 satellites. And one of our founding members at that time was already an agri insurance company, because it was really focusing on monitoring agricultural activities worldwide, and with a specific purpose also for insurance. Over the years, I changed. I did many things, founded several companies, and for a while I was working in a company where we did digital elevation models, large scale, very accurate, which of course were used mainly for the insurance and natural risk in general part. And then over the years so my main line was always trying to get something commercially done. And after many years in that industry, I had to find out, okay, still the industry is not really very commercial. It's very much driven by the government. So the analysis led to the fact that, okay, it's all too difficult how we handle the data, how we get access to the data. And that was the founding state of Cloudeo, which we still today. So Cloudeo is a marketplace for all different types of data, resources, and analytics. And we are just set about to enter more into the analytics part by our new platform Answer. But that should stop here my quick introduction, which is getting otherwise too long.
That's certainly quick enough. No worries there. Daniel, could I pass the floor to you?
Sure. So I'm Daniel Wilson. I'm the co-founder and CTO of a startup called SeerAi. We've been around for about 2.5 years now. My background education-wise was in physics. I thought that particle physics was where my career was going to take me, but shortly after school, I ended up in data science. So I started off in the government space. So I worked with a lot of federal government in the United States on data analysis, did a lot of machine learning, deep learning from before people were really even talking about all the world-changing effects that deep learning would have. So that's been a common thread throughout my career, is working with satellite data and other geospatial data together to answer questions. Most of what I've done is bring data together, sometimes seemingly disparate data, in order to answer questions. Satellite data has always been, and Earth observation data has always been a pretty common thread throughout my career, but it's been a mix of different things. I spent a few years at Esri working on geospatial AI and what that would look like. So I was more on the a little bit on the research side and sometimes working on professional services. Eventually, I met my co-founders of SeerAi, Jeremy Thand and Rob Fletcher, and we formed SeerAi together a few years ago to try to advance the state of the art of data fusion. So basically, we saw something missing in the community, some tooling and technologies that we think could help out. And that's what we've been building at SeerAi. We're mostly a software platform company, so we built a platform that allows us to integrate data from a whole bunch of different sources to answer questions.
Got it. So one follow-up question on specifically data fusion. Could you clear up that term for anyone tuning in here? Like, what does data fusion mean other than indeed like fusing data from multiple sources? What makes it particularly technologically challenging, and how is it a game changer?
Yeah. So data fusion can have a lot of different meanings depending on who's talking about it. So thanks for the clarification. When I say data fusion, really what I just mean is every piece of data brings a unique perspective on the world. So if I have one data set, it will answer some questions, and another data set might answer different questions. If I bring them together, I hopefully will be able to answer many more questions than I can answer with just either of them. So usually it's combining something like multiple satellite sources together. So a common example of this, I think, people can relate to if they're familiar with Earth observation, is looking at a combination of synthetic aperture radar data, which gives you a lot of different interesting measurements about the surface of the Earth, along with electro-optical sensors, multispectral imagery that you can combine together to get a more complete picture of the Earth. When I talk about data fusion in general, though, I'm talking about more than just the satellite sources. There's foundational data on the Earth, things like building footprints or where the locations of roads are, and sometimes having all of this knowledge together gives you a much more complete answer to your question. It's difficult because data is in different format, comes from different locations, different services, different organizations, different collection methods. And the challenge is really how do you bring all of that data together into a common operating space so that you can run analysis on it.
Gotcha. All right.
May I add something? Because
absolutely.
One thing is it's to bring technically data together. The other one is culturally, because coming from the space sector, I started when we founded Rapid Eye, we thought, okay, we just have the satellite image, we can do everything whatsoever. So we're coming from and over the time, still I'm a physical guy, I'm looking from physical data, bring together. But if you then cross the insurance industry and you see people are coming from a different background, they're just looking at historical data, finance data, and so on, and and this is really one of the big challenges, to get these two different views together. So it's not just a technical issue, it's really also a cultural issue that people even understand what they can do with the other side of data, so that the physical guys understand that physics is one thing, and it's probably a very important thing, but on the other side, understanding the business, really understanding where the history is coming from, and this industry is usually dealing with this type of problems is important. So I'm not repeating myself, but this is it's an aspect I think we should be aware of from the beginning, specifically if we're talking about insurances, and we as physical guys, it's so easy, we can do so much, but we have to always understand what's the real value, or what can be understood by the target industry, the insurance industry here.
Absolutely. And to actually double click on that, considering your background, I consider you a person who is very good at answering this particular question. How does Earth observation data help prepare and manage risk within the insurance industry? Like, can we make that concrete with a couple of examples?
I think specifically because we're also talking a bit with the perspective of climate change. I mean, insurance was good in a stable system. Looking back, what happened in the past, you had grown business for hundreds of years, literally, and that was pretty good. But still, it was limited to what happened in the past, and it was limited to people letting the insurer know what damages occurred and which have been settled in the past. With the changing climate, and not only with the changing climate, but also with more international business, of course, the history or the statistics of the past don't give you answers too much into the future. So I think there is definitely required a shift towards measuring data, and also reflecting the change in climate, the change also of in the regions of operations and so on. And for that, for really understanding the spatial context, understanding the dynamics and the physics around what really happens, I think there's no other way than remote sensing. Satellites is very efficient, of course, more for the maybe lower resolution, but combined with aerial, with drones, plus in situ, but still geospatial measurements. That is really what you need going forward, because that's the only way to get a more combined spatial understanding of the different parameters. So I think it's absolutely a must going forward, understanding the real physics.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, like having had a lot of conversations with insurance companies myself, you find that the vast majority of people working for them feel like they've been using spatial data for decades already, because they're like, well, generally we know the location of our assets, and generally we know how to adapt our policies to that location. But as soon as you start talking to reinsurers, modelers, the more data science side of the organization, they start to realize that the complexity of the analytics they are actually looking to run isn't supported by the data that they have and the way that they're currently managing it. So the misconception almost that, you know, spatial data has already been rampant within the insurance industry is, I think, largely wrong. And indeed, like a new injection of new data sources is actually necessary to make that transition towards predicting rather than just, you know, projecting the future based on history. And that's what I understand you're also saying. Like, historic records aren't enough to properly predict or project the future.
The reason why so more than 20 years ago, 25 years ago, this agriculture insurance company invested in us was that they wanted to, first of all, go from the hail insurance to a multi-peril insurance, which they didn't really understand, but they also wanted to get into new areas. So going to other European countries and later maybe even other countries. So they realized that they have no clue. Yes, they understood in the past, but they have no clue to extend that business. And I think for that, it was clear that they have to invest in something like this. So they were very early in the thinking. And I think what you see in the industry overall is because of this reason that you need to have something also for third world countries or for other countries where you don't have the grown history and grown infrastructure. Something like the index insurance has been created, but if you look today, it's not very successful yet. The index insurances, because just simply the trigger events, the physics behind is very simple. They're using very simple temperature indices, which is not reflecting the stuff. So I think it's clear that they have understood the direction, but still, what has been implemented so far is by far not sufficient to really. To really change the whole industry.
And would you say that has largely to do with the input data types that they're using? Does it have to do with the analytics methods that they're using, or more with like larger infrastructural challenges, or perhaps all of the above?
I think it's all of the above. I think mainly, as you can, I mean, if you're thinking again, what triggers a plant, I mean, I'm talking a lot about agriculture with infrastructure is slightly different, but it's still the same issue. The problem is that the input data they have to really determine the insurance trigger, for example, for the index insurance, that what they have is pretty simple still. I mean, there's just no sophistication about the models and the indices they're using. And which leads to the fact that it's shortcoming. I mean, they create a lot of frustration at the insurers, at the insuree sides, because sometimes if they accept an index insurance, at the end they have to accept they are not paid, even if they see physically that they have a damage on the field. So there's a mismatch between what the index is telling what would happen or what happened, and what indeed happened. And I think this is a problem with our technologies, with what SeerAi is doing, what we are doing, with really coming up with better parametric models and better representation of what really happens, still in an automated fashion, I think this will have a big future. But so I think that is one of the key topics, probably.
Yeah. And so you say there's still little sophistication. I'd like to kick the ball over to Daniel there. What sort of sophistication would need to be inserted if it were up to you? With all the data and the methods that are technically available to us, like if you were the president of the world.
Well, I think there's been a pretty big focus. This is true with most people, of doing what worked well in the past, continuing to perform the same sorts of analysis that you've done. And I think the technological landscape has changed things quite a bit from that perspective. There's a few different things that I think are important. One, Earth observation data is much more widespread than it used to be. So even just the publicly available sources, there's much more of it available. And I don't think that most of the analysis world has quite caught up to that fact, even though a lot of these sensors have been up for a few years now, and then there's been a lot of increase in commercial sensors. And the second thing is the tools and technologies from a data scientist perspective. A lot of that has changed dramatically over the last decade, especially. The advent of deep learning, I think, has been a big change, big driving force, but a lot of that's still really underutilized. A lot of people think of deep learning as I can detect things in pictures, and that's great. That's one use case of it. But it's a lot more general purpose than that. And so one thing that we're finding, especially at SeerAi on the data fusion side of the house, is combining multiple data sources together and predicting things that happened in the past. It's not about looking at one individual source, it's about looking at other things. So kind of calling back on the agri insurance thing. One of the trends that we've seen recently in US crops is a change in some of the crop rotation patterns. So even looking at Earth observation data like weather patterns and crop loss due to severe weather events and other things like that. There's also changes in behavior either that are economically driven. So things like if a field's normally in a corn soy type rotation, but then several years in a row they switch to one or the other. That's the sort of thing that doesn't necessarily come out just by looking at satellite observations. It requires analysis of historical claims data, planting intentions, as well as measured crop types. So that's something that I think is a little bit different. That's not something that you tease out very easily by looking at point data sets. You have to look at much larger Earth observation data sets. So I think kind of going back on your original question, the answers require really a large amount of data and a lot of different data that people may not be used to working with. But from the technological side, a lot of that has changed over the last decade. The tools are becoming available, but I don't think they have been historically.
Yeah, it sounds like there's a lot of, we all want to have the situation where 1 + 1 is 3. And we all feel like that should be available to us given enough data and enough skill in applying AI to it. But the 1 + 1 is 3 equation seems pretty far off considering the state of the infrastructure and the state of data use in insurance today. I feel like SeerAi, perhaps Answer at Cloudeo, are like well positioned to start cracking that nut. Is that right? Is that also what you would be after, or what your proposition towards this market would be? Like, okay, this holy grail of more value from your data is there, and we have the data availability and the analytical skills to break that open?
Of course, we have to be very careful because it's a big thing here. I know from my activity of a previous company what I said with these digital elevation models which we produced, and we had a joint venture or joint project with Guy Carpenter, monitoring, or not monitoring, but making a flood model, a highly sophisticated flood model of the whole of France. And I know how much effort that was, and that the remote sensing data was only a fraction. Of course, you need then the data of the flood protection, and I know what complication there was in the detail at the end to come up to a full probabilistic model and to have a real representation. So I think we need to be careful not over-promising what we can do. There's still a lot of effort probably required, but coming from certain things and specifically all these climate-related and probably also starting with the agriculture, which is typically less complicated in the way of what accuracies you would need from and the flooding behind and so on. So I think, yes, we can provide a lot, and that would be a lot of advantages for the market and proving, but let's be careful. We don't have answers to everything.
Fair. That's a fair note. I think in general, a lot of people feel like Earth observation overpromises, but like the important asterisk to me here is like it's not just Earth observation data. It's only part of the equation. There are a lot of other data sets that are absolutely essential to actually start making sense of risks and changing risks. Is that indeed a fair assessment? I see you nodding, but I don't want to overgeneralize.
It's actually the message also which Danny gives is that you have to combine, you make data fusion from all different types of sources, which might be partially not related to geospatial at all or to remote sensing data at all. So it is, I think, but Danny, I shouldn't speak for you, but I think that's clear that we are nodding for that statement.
All right.
Yeah.
So sort of going back to what is necessary to deal with a world that sees more catastrophes and catastrophes that we want to understand and be able to predict better, there is a need to leverage more data types, more sensors, and pour those into generally more advanced and more sophisticated data analytics methods and models than we're currently using. That's like one of the conclusions that we could draw here, correct?
Yeah, I believe so.
All right. So let's talk for a bit about like the speed of data availability. Obviously, like Earth observation and other data sets are powering dashboards and applications that are pretty crucial in the aftermath of catastrophes in terms of like disaster and emergency relief response management that then later on will also become relevant in the claims processes. But how can we ensure that relevant data is available and usable fast? And how does this relate to like pretty complex analysis that sometimes needs to happen before we have anything of value? So can we say something about speed of availability when the need is there? Anyone, feel free to jump in.
I have, I think, kind of a different perspective on this. So SeerAi is less in the data acquisition side and getting the data in quickly, and we mostly rely on other authoritative data sources. So I definitely want to hear from Manfred on his thoughts on this. But from my perspective, one of the challenges of accessing this data is not necessarily it being readily available quickly, but having the knowledge to utilize the data effectively. So just because a data set's available doesn't mean that I'm able to apply it to my problem quickly. So when there's established practices, that's not as much of a concern, and it just matters how fast you can gain access to the data, either downlink from a satellite or orthorectification or other processes that need to go into image data. But the usage of this data is really important, because I don't know people that are adding it to a new model, and we're talking about a changing landscape here, don't necessarily know what they even need to start with. So the knowledge management side of this, I think, is an often overlooked part of it. It's not just availability of data, but what do I do with it?
But here I don't agree completely, because I think, yes, in theory, the data is there. And in theory, you can, I mean, with the existing satellites, with the upcoming satellites, with the aircrafts, with whatever, I mean, there is a huge data set. But if you look really in fact, if you and that is some reason why our industry was overpromising a lot, because you come and you can show a nice application, proof of concept, you can show it and you understand it and great, and then once you have to deliver an operational service or an operational information service, then you immediately get stuck, because you have to ask for a lot of money from the customer, because how the industry said, how to get access. I mean, the satellite company distribution models are still very old fashioned. I mean, that's why we came up with the platform business with Cloudeo 8 years or 9 years ago already now. This is what Ellipsis Drive is doing, is it's trying to make it easier to access the data. And it's not just a technical issue. I think now also with the API access of all different types of data, we are proving a lot, but still, I mean, we are dealing every day with the satellite operators and their terms and agreements and how difficult it is to get them sponsoring revenue sharing models, or to give access to their data at lower cost, maybe participating downstream stuff. So this is extremely complicated still. And even after many years working and trying to solve that issue, I have to say this is still an issue. So I believe it's still very hard, not for proof of concept, not for demonstration purposes, but for offering something on a commercial basis to get really access to the data is still hard, and that has to change. And yeah.
And I definitely don't disagree with that. My point was more, we're going to have to integrate news sources more quickly to respond to these upcoming threats to, well, everything, property, agriculture, everything.
Yeah.
And it's just another dimension.
Yeah, I see that sentiment being very much echoed within mostly reinsurance enterprises, where modelers are like very frustrated in like seeing all these different data sources that are technically available, but they can't sort of figure out how to get them properly integrated into their modeling and into their operations. So like proper data availability and data management is a main blocker there. Yeah, so that's
and also the
tough one.
That these data typically come at a cost, and very often there's a huge mismatch between what an insurer, what a modeler in that industry would be willing to spend for this type of data. I mean, they're coming from a huge business. I mean, we're talking about 500 billion insurance business, but still the amount they're spending for data, even the big ones, is actually a joke. So there's still also education to be done on the insurer side, that they have to accept that it comes at a cost. Yes, there are free data. Yes, there's public data, but there's a lot of the good data which actually had a cost and somehow need to recover the cost. So I think this is also a big issue.
Yeah, I've heard that sentiment also been echoed within like GIS groups at insurance companies, sort of being like, there is a lot of money being pumped around in this business, in this organization, or in this particular market vertical, but then the budget for GIS solutions and data sets is very minimal. So I think you're not the only one in sort of making that side note there. But when talking about sort of fast availability of data, I think we can conclude, and again, correct me if I'm wrong here, that you guys see most steps forward and perhaps most opportunity in the shorter term on basically being prepared for what could happen through indeed modeling and data availability before a catastrophe actually strikes, than in the aftermath, where you do need to rely on data, you do need to buy, license, find. Is that correct? Do you see more like short-term opportunity like within the underwriting part rather than the claims part, or not necessarily?
I see there's opportunity in both. Probably you have to be very selective. What is your first product you come to the market with? And it is traditional. I mean, it is probably simpler than you would expect. You as an engineer or a physicist, you would say, okay, yeah, I can do it much complex. But I think actually you have to be very selective and come up with some simple and rather cheap stuff to get acceptance. And this can be on both sides. And I think definitely after damage, then there's a huge opportunity, because then if there's big numbers then to be paid out, there's also willingness to provide to buy data there. So I think it's on both sides. Both.
Then all of a sudden there is a realization that things are allowed to cost something. Yeah. All right. Understood.
I mean, coming from my perspective, I spent a lot more time on the response, the post-disaster side. So analysis of imagery and damage estimation and that kind of thing. I feel like there's still a lot more low-hanging fruit on that side, but I think there's a lot more dividends to be paid on the preparation side.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, actually. Low-hanging fruit versus like potential return on investment. I also feel like that's my experience there, or my particular view, that there is a lot of return on investment to be gained before disaster strikes, but like the low-hanging fruit seems to be afterwards. So yeah, my personal preference is to focus on the place where ROI is strongest, but that's a matter of taste, perhaps. Interesting point, though. So let me go to an audience question that we've received, and I'm gonna just read this out loud. So bear with. So question to you guys: what is the trend regarding consolidation of risk data? Are we trending towards a world where all the world's risk data is gathered in one greater pool? Or do we expect companies to protect their data silos and thus leaving global risk data more fragmented? In other words, will raw data be a commodity or a proprietary asset? Who would have volunteered?
Okay. Okay, I can start then. I think there's no clear answer. Of course, it will be always that commercial company will try to get a USP and protect certain data and try to keep it for itself. At the same time, a lot of data is available publicly. There's a huge many data sets which are open source data. So it will be more common good to have risk data. I'm a big believer that actually in the future we will see much more smart contracting, blockchain-based smart contracting business models in the insurance sector, where by definition there's more transparency. So it's not a clear yes and no. It's both. There will always be, as I said, people who try to have data pools, but on the other side will have their own sources. But in principle, I think it's getting more transparent and easier for everybody to understand the risk. And also traditionally, the insurance is that's their key asset, that they have the information, and their insurers don't have a lot of information other of their own, so they are always in a weak negotiation position. I think this definitely would change. I think for people who are not the insurers, it is much easier to get access to data in the future.
Before kicking it over to Daniel for his take on this, could I ask you for some extra color on the blockchain-based models, like some examples perhaps, because I think it's quite interesting. So I want to zoom in on it a little bit before going forward.
I think what does blockchain bring? What smart contracts in blockchain bring? First of all, you can efficiently, automatically exchange information in a secure way, and you can also do a transfer of value within one computer code, within one smart contract. So you can define a relationship, all different types of relationships between a farmer and the processor and the farmer and the supply company, the processor, and also you can, without having too much risk, you can introduce the value right into the contract. So without having with the security that nobody pays something in an unjust way. And you can then do this for small transactions. So let's talk about developing world where there's not a big grown existing market. There are small farmers, little fields. So it's not worth for to come up with a large contract and many partners involving that would not work, but having a smart contract which is attached to a real world oracle like our Answer. I mean, this is what we plan to do with Answer. Answer is supposed to be an oracle for smart contracts in the blockchain, or not blockchain. It can be also centralized, but smart contracts, and that will allow so many new business models, from micro insurance, microfinance, totally future contracts, and so on, which are automated and small in size, without having a huge organization to run with, but you can do it more in an organic fashion. So I'm a great believer that this will be a huge market going forward, and specifically will also help this almost stuck index insurance policy. I mean, if you look today, only 1% of the insurances is index insurance. I think smart contracts will play a major role to make this a much bigger part of the insurance business.
Maybe that's the topic for our next webinar then. Thanks for thanks for adding that. Yeah, Daniel, what's your take on like data as a commodity versus a proprietary asset, or anything in between?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of two reasons why data stays siloed, and Manfred touched on one of those. Data's a huge asset to individual organizations, and democratization of that data is losing a competitive edge that some organizations may have. But there's another reason that I think data remains siloed that is a solvable problem, and I think we're seeing solutions, many more solutions to this in the future. And that's one of the technological solution. A lot of people are using different platforms, different APIs, different formats, different services. Everything is, however that organization wants to deal with data. And because there's so much fragmentation in the geospatial data world, it's very hard for people to be interoperable. So from that perspective, I'm seeing a lot more standardization, a lot more of the community moving towards standard APIs, more common APIs and formats that make it easier for people to access this data. Something that we've been doing at SeerAi as well is trying to lower the barrier on that. So rather than forcing, well, we're not forcing anyone, but rather than requiring them, people adopt a particular type of API or format, we focus very, very highly on interoperability. So we try to make it so that we can take data from one source and convert it into the source that the user actually wants to work with, even if the original source isn't what they want. I know that Ellipsis Drive has been focusing on a lot of these standard APIs, making it very simple and straightforward to gain access to the customer's data without having to be in one particular camp of geospatial analysis. So the short answer to that is the short answer is I see the world moving more towards interoperability, and I think that will break down a lot of these silos, and data will remain a proprietary asset for a lot of companies when it's more valuable for them to do so. But I think the technological barriers are fading.
Yeah. So basically, like, proprietary data is natural, and it's not a bad thing, as long as we do have interoperability and we do have a level playing field in exchange. And that's also where we'll expect everything to eventually be headed. That's trying to again summarize some good points here. Right. So I'd like to move on to some closing thoughts. So I'd like to ask both of you to sort of share your view on which changes you expect in the near to mid future. So let's say the next 2 years, and the role that you or your company has to play in this change. So I don't want to particularly hear about like future changes like 5 years down the road, but something tangible and just around the corner. Manfred, could I ask you to go first?
Okay, I will make an arc here, because I will start. Actually, I was always a believer that with satellite, remote sensing, whatever, you can do so many great stuff. So I'm coming from an idealistic view, founded the company RapidEye, where, okay, once you can monitor the world every month, you have a guaranteed image, you can do so much stuff and so on. And then over years, and then facing reality, we tried a lot with modeling. We tried then to make a platform where everybody could easily access data, do all this wonderful analytics. Still, it is frustrating to see after so many years still that the industry is extremely slow and still bound fully on the project business. So it's really tough for our industry, remote sensing industry, to become really commercial. So still, I believe that there was success. I mean, there was a general feeling in many of these insurance industries or fintech industry, or not tech even, so in the financial industry, dealing with these type of issues, that there's an awareness now that, yeah, it has to go there. So I believe opportunities are actually there, even if the industry is so slow behind. So and also the customer industry. So what now coming more specific to your question, I'm a strong believer that we have to start somewhere simple, which people understand, which brings an immediate benefit compared to the existing methods, but it's still easy to understand. It doesn't help if we're thinking too much, too complex, if we're using too many buzzwords, which we did in the past terribly. I mean, we were always trying to find equity and investors, and of course you're using buzzwords and you're building up a nice picture, but at the end it all boils down to have something which really has a easy to understand and has an immediate impact. And that's what I believe we are focusing on. I mean, like answers, we started with something which is actually not terribly complicated. I think what is behind the technology is very complicated, but to understand that what the data is delivered, it's really last 40 years of climate parameters, risk parameters, and with a connection to the real-time prediction. And then over time, make it more complex with API-based imagery after the fact and so on. So what we want to do is we want to come up with something very simple, go to the market, have initial success with that, and then over time extend it to a more complicated thing in which we all believe that this will bring huge value over a long time. Not sure if that's a fair statement.
No, I think it is, and this is indeed like a 2-year timeline. Like you're on the market already with Answer.
We just entered half a year, and we're still in the phase that we try. We're just looking. We have now created the Oracle, if you want. So let's keep in that wording. What is still missing is now to bring in the first applications by ourselves. I mean, it's open to everybody. So everybody, it's a white label approach. Everybody could use Answer as an input for the analytics. But at the same time, we know, because we have experienced that with Cloudeo, just having a platform where you exchange data doesn't bring the business. You have to be much more active in the end application and providing something which is really bought by somebody without even thinking about what's all behind. And that is what we're focusing on with Answer. And that is something we haven't brought up in the market. We're working in the background. We have started already 6 years ago. We had our first blockchain initiative at that time, the CBN Foundation. And we're coming back to that and using that now really to come up with the real simple but very good products based on Answer as the Oracle. So, but you have to be patient a bit. It will take a few weeks, month before we will publish, make it public. But this is what you can expect from us, where we are going.
Well, that falls well within that 2-year time frame I gave you guys.
Yes,
so that's an accepted answer. Daniel, how's this for you?
Yeah, so I think over the last several years, we've seen remarkable changes in the availability of tools and technologies that were out of reach for most people. So coming at this from a data science perspective, let's say 10 years ago, just getting started with machine learning was next to impossible. And I think that machine learning is adding a lot of value to this world. Like, I think there's a lot of areas where exploiting Earth observation data, we have a lot of gains to be had from machine learning. And the last several years, I've seen a lot of democratization of that. So more data scientists able to access computer vision models, ChatGPT and stuff like that being in the headlines recently has, I think, gotten a lot more attention on the space in general. And so I'm seeing a lot of changes very, very near term. In the last several years, and definitely within the next couple of years, I think a lot of this stuff is going to get much, much easier. So from that perspective, being able to utilize these new approaches with the data is where our focus is. It's a bit then on, there's all these data sets out there, and if you're a geospatial expert, you can gain access to them. And systems like Cloudeo make it much easier to gain access to Earth observation data for someone that's not used to all the different formats and technologies that you need to access it. But then there's still a question of bringing that data to the data scientists so that they can really answer questions. What we're focused on is that analytics platform. Like how do you combine all this data together to answer questions? And I alluded to data fusion at the beginning. A lot of times it's not just Earth observation data, but multiple sources together. How do you combine those? That's where SeerAi specifically, we've gone to market with our platform that allows integration of complex data sources, running analytics, and the knowledge management behind what a data set is good for, what questions it can answer. That's there today, and I think I'm seeing a lot more of that approach coming in the next several years.
All right, understood. So exciting times ahead, I'd say.
But Rosalie, now you may have to make also your statement. I'm interested about your point of view and about your plans.
Oh, this is now the curveball for the moderator. All right, yeah. So what Ellipsis Drive aims to do is basically take away most of the friction that we're currently experiencing around like data standardization, data unification, before like proper integration management and ingestion starts. So our main play for the next couple of years is to enable mostly enterprises to do this, insurance enterprises included, because they're sitting on very bulky and very old data infrastructure setups that are due for an update. That's very scary to them, though, and understandably so, because a lot of operations are depending on that. So what we aim to do is usher in an alternative that respects the status quo in terms of their IT infrastructure that can't be touched, but still enables them to support a future that respects the spatial element of their business and enables them to start ingesting new analytics, new data products, and start feeding into those models. So yeah, that's our play for the next couple of years, and that should be plenty of time to get that done in. So yeah, indeed, exciting times ahead.
That's why we cooperate.
Yes, indeed. So with those closing thoughts, I'd like to close off the talk for today. So thanks so much for watching. Thanks to Manfred and Daniel for sharing their insights with us today. And until next one.